Hi everyone. Today I'll be presenting on sexism. My name is Singh. So the scenario we have is of a workplace where a woman is told that she only has 5 minutes to speak, whereas the men in the meeting are allowed to speak for longer. And as soon as she reaches a 5 minute limit, she's cut off. So I want to touch on there's two types of definitions for sexism. The first would be a traditional sense of unwelcome sexual advances, being touched inappropriately, and pretty much all the stuff like we've seen so much of on Twitter, etc., where they use the hashtag #MeToo, and it includes inappropriate comments towards the body or appearance of a woman, and sexist jokes and comments. And then the other form, the other definition would be institutional, where an organization, either directly or indirectly, from policies and procedures of organizations, discriminates against women. And included with that, it affects their job stability, their salaries, and opportunities for training and promotion. So this form of sexism in the workplace, it has a toll on women. And I looked at a specific study that talked about the effects of sexism. And they looked at three main factors. And they also relied on previous research. And there was only one study done of the sort, and they sought to replicate it. And they replicated it, and the findings were consistent. So I'll start with the different factors that they used in their study. And they said that sexism negatively predicts mental health and job satisfaction. And what links these two factors of mental health and job satisfaction is the women's sense of belonging in their industry. So this is a mediating variable. And the idea behind it is that workplace sexism leads to a reduced sense of belonging in the workplace. And then this reduced sense of belonging, it leads to poor mental health. So poor social sense of belonging or social connectedness leads to a poor mental health, which as a result, so this poor sense of belonging also, it leads to lower job satisfaction. So poor sense of belonging leads to poor mental health and lower job satisfaction. And the initial study was conducted with just one workplace in Australia with about 263 miners, like women that work for a mining company. And then to control for to fix the limitations of the previous study, this new group, they used women from different industries and different companies. And another limitation that they controlled for was that the group that the other study, they had no hypothesis. So they were primarily just doing exploratory study, whereas this group had an hypothesis, so it was a confirmatory study. And so they, just to repeat, they replicated it. So sexism, it leads to poorer mental health and less job satisfaction in a male-dominated industry and company. And it also leads to a decrease in sense of belonging And this sense of belonging is what mediates the two. And then something to note is that women that report higher and on being feminine, they are at a greater risk of experiencing sexism, and as a result, poor mental health and job satisfaction. And the limitations for the second study were that it's a cross-sectional correlational research design, which is they can't determine what the causal effect is, whether whether a poor sense of belonging leads to poor mental health and job satisfaction, or whether it's, for example, poor mental health that leads to job dissatisfaction, which as a result leads to poor sense of belonging. And then lastly, the limitation is that it's a self-report measure, and there's always variation possible for that. So the next study was about social identity threat and the effects it has on working memory. So just to give a definition of social identity threat, the social identity threat, it is a broad concern that one's group is devalued. And then it can manifest in a few different ways. So if, for example, males or even females harbor negative expectations about the female's abilities in a stereotype domain. So the stereotype domain would be a male-dominated setting, such as a trade job, for example. And then another way is gender-based exclusion and rejection, and not being taken seriously and being viewed or treated as a second-class citizen. And the premise is that social identity threat affects executive function, which means our ability to maintain attention and cognition and our behavior, and to be able to be in control of that. So this was also done by a previous group, and the current group sought to replicate this and confirm the findings. So the premise, right? The premise is that a strongly group identified woman would show impaired working memory as a result of social identity threat. And why that is because that strongly identified woman sees that threat as self-relevant and meaningful. That's why it affects her. And then because of that, she experiences stress faced with that threat. And with that stressor, when there's physiological arousal, and then there's negative thoughts and emotions, and she becomes preoccupied with that stressor, and then potentially engages in coping strategies to mitigate these said reactions. And so these reactions require resources and attention. And because of the depletion of these resources, it impairs her performance on all types of domain that rely on working memory, or in other words, memory capacity. So with that, the method they used was, firstly, the participant would complete a measure that shows their gender identification, and then they completed a working memory task. And then the working memory task, they read a sentence, and then they're supposed to count the vowels, the number of vowels, and then they're presented with a one-syllable simple word. And then after being presented with that, like 2 seconds later, they're asked to recall and write down the number of vowels in the set of sentences that was presented before. And then right after that, they're asked to recall the one-syllable word. And the catch here is that half of the set of sentences have, you could say, sexist comments, such as women should cook and clean, a woman will never be a president, and women are the worst drivers out there, or women are annoying and they whine a lot, stuff like that. And the control set of sentences were illness related, and it would say something like the doctor checked the x-ray of a broken bone, or he fixed operated on someone's scratched eye. And the reason why these illness related sentences were chosen is because they make the participant uncomfortable, but not to the degree of a sexist comment. So after that, then they were asked to report on anxiety measures, and then on another test that would measure their anger. And there was also a measure assessing how preoccupied they were with sexist thoughts while they were conducting the exercise. So the findings matched up with the previous study, and pretty much gender-based social identity threat is particularly detrimental to the working memory of women who are more identified with their group. So for intervention, there have been many types of or forms of intervention, and the specific one I've read about is it uses videos. So the acronym you see there, VIDS. Sorry about that. So the acronym you see there, VIDS, it stands for Video Interventions for Diversity. And it consists of 2 narrative videos and 2 expert interview videos. And the narrative videos show stories illustrating the empirical results of selected published papers on gender bias and stereotypes. And these are written by professional playwrights to ensure that they're engaging, that they evoke the right emotions, and they get the right message across, and they're entertaining. And then the expert interviews, they have professional actors that either play science professor, graduate students, or lab techs. And these, instead of using all the emotions, they're more straightforward and fact-based. And it pretty much shows an interview conducted of a psychology professor. And VIDS has been used before, and it's proven to be effective. And the angle that the current group was approaching this was that could it possibly have negative impact, and how to mitigate for that. So they came up with their own module that is presented after the participant watches VIDS, and the name of that is Unite. And what that stands for is it pretty much summarizes the goal, the mission of reducing sexism. But just to say, so the U is underscore effective diversity training, and the N is to notice and correct for your implicit biases, and I is to include inclusive pictures and language. And T is take time to mentor your fellow employees. And E is emphasize employees will and can improve. So the purpose is to communicate that bias is malleable. It can be changed. And that, if people are motivated, they can decrease their own biases and that of their fellow employees. And Unite is a PowerPoint presentation that shows graphics and visuals. And it provides examples of individuals who've already decreased their bias as well. And so as in previous research for VIDs, it increases the awareness of bias and reduces sexism. It allows the participant, to identify biases and increase the ability to differentiate between bias from fair treatment. But the catch is that it's ineffective at supporting a growth mindset, and it doesn't lead to self-efficacy to address bias. Or in other words, that because the participant is exposed to negative information, that they sometimes, or a lot of the times, according to this, they have a negative mindset and they feel that, they kind of give up, that it's not possible to change, the mindset of others and reduce sexism. So that's why after watching VIDs, it's important, and it showed successful that once a person goes through Unite, that module, it buffers against the perceptions that gender bias is unchangeable and restores participants' self-efficacy. And it addresses the bias among the general population. Or it restores the participant's self-efficacy to address, the bias. And so using VIDs and Unite, then it's more likely that the workplace will result in an equitable and inclusive setting. So for community research, I looked at Stats Canada website and searched, and I found some interesting facts and stats that I wanted to share. So you probably have heard of the top 1%. So that refers to the top 1% of all people that are earning in Canada. And that income bracket is, I think, like 270 something thousand. So if you earn that much or higher, then you would be in the top 1%. And women that are in the top 1% are younger than men, and they've obtained higher level of education, and they're more likely to have a degree and to have studied in medicine or related fields. So that would kind of be a gender specific industry for women, and they're twice as likely as men to work in health, and they're typically physicians, and 1 in 5 women in the top 1% are physicians. So men, contrary or opposite to women, they work in management. So that would be senior management, and 1 in 3 men are senior managers in the top 1%. And some stats for marital status and children: a higher percentage of men are married and they have 2 or more kids. So these are 2 separate stats. 88% of men are married and in the top 1%, versus 77% of women are married and in the top 1%. And 63% of men will have 2 or more kids versus 52% of women will have 2 or more kids. And the reason why there are more men in the top 1% with being married and with kids is because I guess there are already gender differences in women typically earn less, and there's been a lot of discrimination over decades and decades, and specifically with gender roles. So at home, women are expected to cook and clean, and that's a lot of unpaid work that they have to do, and that takes up a lot of time. So therefore, if they're going to be married, they're going to be expected to do all that, and that's why less women that are in the top 1% are married, because it would require more time, which they just don't have, and being in the top 1%. And women, they have less of an income. Their median income is $362,300, whereas men's is $393,200. That's a difference of like $30,000. So the next article is about the gender pay gap, and this was also on Stats Canada. And so you probably heard that women earn less than men, and my economics prof explained it in a very interesting way of why that is, which I won't cover here. But yeah, it's been talked about in every field, I guess, economics, and now we're talking about in psychology. So the Stats Canada article shows that 15 to 16 years of age and older women earned 69 cents to 89 cents for every dollar that a man earned. And this stat is from 2017. Along with that, the article says that they do more unpaid work at home. So that could be a potential cause for their earnings to suffer. And their employment is concentrated in certain occupations that parallel traditional gender roles. And that being said, women earn less than men even at the same skill level. If they're working a job that has the same skill level that of a job that a man is working, they'll still earn less. And even if they have a job where they put the same amount of time in that a man does, they will still earn less. So this inequity in the wages and also in the representation of women in the top 1%, it shows that there is prejudice, there is discrimination in the workplace towards women. So yes, women have penetrated the glass ceiling, that figurative glass ceiling where they cannot rise above, certain manager roles, even into senior management. But they have made it to, less women are in senior management than men, but they have made it to higher paying jobs, made it to that level. And that being said, there still is discrimination, and the stats show that. And the gender pay gap also shows that women doing the same job will earn less. So I've shown you a very effective way to influence and change people's mindset towards discrimination in the workplace. And unfortunately, I didn't have enough time or resources to go look through ways to do it at, in other settings. But for community settings, I would strongly recommend doing it, teaching at home. And that's where the foundation starts. And if we teach our young, I'm pretty sure I've come across this in other research articles and for other topics in psychology. And the message is that if we teach our young, the children, at a young age, between right and wrong, and more so even abolishing gender roles. So if a boy wants to play with a Barbie doll, that shouldn't be punished. And if a boy wants to paint his nails, or if a girl wants to do things that would be typical of a boy, parents are the ones that reinforce these gender roles. So parents should be mindful, and they should exemplify equality. And I guess the best way to do that is to actually carry out. So, for example, maybe dad should make dinner some days, and vice versa. And if a daughter wants to be a mechanic, then that shouldn't be frowned upon either. So I feel that if and that goes for racism as well. If children are allowed to be themselves, then the world will be a better place. So with that, I would like to conclude this presentation, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, and these are all the references I used.